Israel,
Hey, how you doing?
what's going on today?
There you go. You are.
Yeah,
How
well,
you
you are too.
how you doing, Joe? Good to meet you, man.
Hey, good to meet you, man. Reading your bio wore me out. You're a busy guy.
A little bit. I keep busy. I keep busy for sure.
But looks like you're stepping out on your own on this project. But before we get to that, I want to know how you survived COVID. As somebody that's as busy as you are with the way that it turned the music world upside down, how did you get through it? And how relieving is this project now that the world's waking up and we're kind of entering a post-pandemic reality?
Well, it's interesting because yeah, everyone we all got locked down, and I had a little, I had to take care of myself and the family and everything else. But just by chance, about 6 months before the lockdown, 6 or 7 months before the lockdown, I consolidated my entire network for remote recording just by chance, as I had recently moved to California, and so I wanted to continue to work with the people that I work with all the time, and and I had just set that all up. So I set myself up. I'm working with studios and recording studios and musicians and arrangers and producers and engineers in about 7 countries. And I set it all up right before the lockdown.
Wow.
So when it took everyone 6 months, because everyone thought it was a 90-day vacation at first, right?
Yeah.
And then it turned into 6 months, and by the time people realized and they finally got everything set up, I actually was all set up and I was up and running. So I actually worked more in the 2 years of COVID than I did in the previous 4 years.
Wow.
Like, like incredible. I re-engaged with my record label. I mean, with my publishing company, and I started the record label as well. So you know, it's been busy, and
Yeah.
I fared quite well. I
Yeah.
can't complain.
Time to shine. Talk about the new album. It's a great album. I've already played it on the show. Tell me how this came about and how you feel about it.
Well, the album itself, uh, it really was a stepping out with it. I've been producing so much music for so many people all my life. I built my whole career on it, and one day I stopped and thought, yo, what about you, right? And and so this is it. I had all this stuff bottled up, and it needed an escape valve, and that's what this is. That's what Impressions ended up being. Uh, it was actually the album was actually the intention of the album had started years ago, uh, several years ago, and I actually had an album put together. I actually had an album put together, and things happened, and I had a catastrophic loss of equipment and files and everything else, and I lost the entire production, which was just all finished and ready to be mixed. And I lost the entire production. And so I looked at it, and I looked at my arrangements and everything else, and I said, screw it. You don't want to be in the album, don't be in the album. I tore everything up, threw it in the trash, and started again from zero, which was really good because the album had been in progress for like 6 years already, 5 or 6 years. And when I did this, I said, no, this is me now. Let's do it now. And within 8 months, it was all set.
Wow.
So it's very much what was at that moment.
Yeah.
We as artists, we have to every now and then we have to sort of take inventory of what we've done, how we've managed to get there, what we're thinking, what we're feeling, and do an inventory and set it down somewhere and document that inventory, and move on. And that's exactly what I did here.
So, what are you hoping the listener gets from this project?
There's two things really. One is, this is me. Please get to know me. Uh, I want to share what I think and how I think about it. Get to know me, please. Um, but the other side of it, is there is I guess, a misconception, or a cliched a cliched way of thinking of Latin music and Latin jazz, and it is it's always descarga, and it's a jam, and it's noisy, and it's rowdy, and it's and I accomplish all of the improvisation and all of the jamming and everything else, but still without the noise, so to speak. Not that it's noise. To me, it isn't. But there's a misconception that that's what it is, and this is very. It's carefully crafted. There's plenty of room. I leave a lot of room for improvisation and expression, and it's there. But it's also very carefully crafted. So it's kind of these two things at the same time.
How did this music journey begin for you? Like, tell me where you were born and raised, and what were the seeds that were put into you to become who you are with all these different musical facets that you have now?
Well, several steps. I'll be very brief if possible. Um, for starters, I started out as an organist. I played the organ. Mom and Dad bought me a little play organ. It had those air pumps, and you press the keys, and it would go like, because it has right. Those were reeds and everything else. Uh, and I had one of those, and I started, and I learned like 6 or 7 tunes by ear, and I picked them out by myself, and I figured them out, and then I went one day to the mall and separated from my parents. I'll see you guys in a half an hour. Yeah, we'll meet at such spot, the meeting spot, but I never showed up at the meeting spot. So Mom and Dad got worried, started looking for me, and they saw a crowd, and they figured there's a crowd. It probably caught Israel's attention. Let's go see, maybe the kid is there. And it turns out that the crowd was there because of the kid, because I had walked into the piano and organ store, uh, into the music store, and I was observing the demonstrator playing on the biggest organ in the place, 3 keyboards, full pedal board, and I sat and I stood there and watched him as he played, and it all sort of made sense. Like I made sense of it in just watching this guy playing for 10 or 15 minutes. It all made sense. And so he got off from the instrument and took the people who were watching him, to go do his sales thing. And I got on the instrument. A couple of minutes and kind of figured it out and got my wits together and started playing, 5 tunes that I really knew, just kind of fudging my way through them. And when I got done, I turned off the organ. I finished and turned around, and then I heard applause. What happened, there had been a whole bunch of people gathering behind me. Must have been, oh, I don't know, maybe about 80 people or so. And they all stood there quietly watching this tiny little kid, which was about 9 years old, 10 years old, uh, playing this huge monster of an instrument. And everyone was like amazed by it. And they didn't applaud until I turned off the instrument and turned around. So at that point, it was like, oh, wow, like, really? this is cool that people like this, and I'm enjoying it. And right, so that turned into I started working professionally when I was 12. Uh, I got my, first guy who came over to ask permission from my parents to let me play with them was a guy, a very famous guy who had called Papa Candito in Puerto Rico, who had his own show and had his own thing going. He was a pretty popular Cuban guy. Uh, and it went from there. Then I went up to New York when I was around 16. I went through New York, and a friend took me to see Machito at the Roseland Ballroom, and he introduced me. He was the father of a friend of mine, and so he was an older gentleman, and Machito and him were friends, and he was the he was the vice president for Pierce Southern International, the Latin division in New York. And so he introduced me very kindly to Machito, and hey, listen, new young talent coming from Puerto Rico, young kid, the new promise, all this other stuff. And so that was it. And we introduced and we said hello. Machito went on stage, and when he was on stage, he yelled out at me. He said, "Yo, hey kid." And I looked at him and says, "See that chair over there? Bring it to me." So I grabbed the chair, I brought it to the maestro, here you are. And he opened up the chair, slapped it in the middle of the rhythm section, and said, "Sit and listen and learn." That flipped in my head. Oh shit, I want to compose. I want to arrange. The sound of that big band sitting there and listening to that whole big band just rocking the whole stage, man. That changed everything.
That was it. But it's interesting because you got the serum early on. I mean, when you were in that shop and everybody applauded, that had to be instant. There you go. You sealed your fate to a certain degree.
Yeah, there was instant gratification there for sure,
Yeah.
and but it was very much a, a child's play,
Yeah.
right? I never thought of it as oh, this is the way I'm going to make a living, right? I could make a living. It was like, oh wow, cool, I'm getting attention, right? And of course, mom and dad bought me an organ that day, right there.
So you didn't get in trouble. You got awarded.
I got rewarded for being in trouble.
There you go. That's the lesson, kids. So, um, so when did you really, what stage were you on early on where you really felt like you arrived, that this was it? Like beyond when you were a kid, but professionally, when did you really feel comfortable like this is my life? Or has it always been that way since it happened so early?
It's interesting that I never thought of that question. Never thought of the of how to respond to that question. Um, you know, I started working. I started working the clubs. Of course, this is a different time, right? When things were more permissible, so to speak. We lived in a different time, and I was 15. I was working all the clubs and the hotels in Puerto Rico on both the Isla Verde and the Condado Strip. I used to work everything, and I used to sit at the bars, and I used to, hang, and it was a different time. Um, and there, I felt like I was really involved in playing, and I was making a life from it. But I was still, I was a young kid, so I'm still thinking, well, there are other things to do, right? Uh, but I've been literally making a living from music since I was 15, um, and thinking that this is definitely a part of my life. I I I went I got into the service, joined the army, was in the army band, uh, and I was in Hawaii. I was stationed in Hawaii, and there I started my first salsa band. And there I really started getting serious about composing and arranging and really learning the craft. I got really lucky. I had a friend who was in the army band with me, who was the son, no, not the son. He was the nephew of a very renowned musical figure from Puerto Rico. The master Lito Peña, who was one of the greatest guys in Puerto Rico. And he was his nephew. He was, full-fledged musician, understood things, very classically trained and everything. And he taught me a lot of things. He taught me how to transcribe, for instance. And there I start to understand that I could learn from all of the masters, that I could learn by transcribing what they did. And as I transcribed, I better understood the intersection of melody, rhythm, and harmony, and how they worked together. And I started to and I really understood the value of silence too, which was really mind blowing to me. That music is as much sound as it is silence, and syncopation is really created not by sound but by silence. It's the gap that you leave. That's what creates the syncopation for you. It's that. And so all of these things started really coming together in a very strong and deep professional sense. And when I left the army, I went back to Puerto Rico, and uh, I joined the band of Roberto Roena, who was a well-renowned and established salsa band leader. And it was interesting. I joined him as musical director, and it was really interesting because it was his band that I saw for the first time, that I saw a salsa band, a live salsa band, when I was about 8 years old. It was his band. And so for me to come back around, almost 20 years later, or yeah, about 20 years later, and now be his musical director,
Wow.
it was like, oh wow, like this is incredible, right? I also joined another group called Batacumbele, which was, a lot of people say that it is the Puerto Rican version of Iraquere, and traveled and played with them for about 4 years. It was a wonderful group. In fact, really, the Batacumbele kind of split life for me before and after Batacumbele. I mean, that really. But going back to Roberto Roena, there I learned things from Roberto that I had not learned from anywhere else regarding production. I understood what production was all about. Roberto couldn't read a note, and he played percussion. He played bongos, uh, and we were recording an album, his album for that year, and every night he would leave the studio with a cassette of what had been done during the day. He'd take it home and he'd digest that all night and come back to the studio the next day and go on. By the time he recorded his instrument, he actually had an arrangement in his head of how the bongo and the cowbell were going to sound, and exactly, almost precisely, where each hit was going to go. Had a full arrangement in his head, and he taught me about the mystique of it, the nuance, about how you have to be careful and very deliberate about how you build your music and how you present your production and how you manage your musicians. That just a lesson, a school in production of a guy who was a pioneer in his own field, right? And that all of that just really cemented the finished cementing the base for my production life and my professional life that developed after that.
So, of all of these elements that go into who you are as a professional musician and producer, what do you look forward to the most? What wakes you up? What gets you energized every day?
You know what? Today, these days, impressions. I and the reason I say that is because I now I have a product that is mine, which I hadn't had before. And I'm telling you, I had to do exactly the same thing I do for everyone else with my album, but it's different.
Yeah.
It's totally different when you're doing it for yourself. Um, and so now I have this, right? This is different. And it makes me choose now very carefully what I do. And it inspires me to do more. Like I've committed myself now to producing an album every year. This is what I'm committed to, and I actually have 3 albums on in the works right now.
Cool.
I'm hoping that the Latinbaum Jazz Ensemble is going to be. I'm going to produce this every 2 years, and in between, I'm going to do other things, other projects that I have kind of sitting there on the stovetop, just simmering. Uh, that's what wakes me up these days. This is what brings me out of, gets me out of bed.
So let's get to the core of who you are. Everyone has a perception of you: family, friends, fans, clients, colleagues, but you're the one in control. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Um, I think that um, really the if there's something that defines um, who I am and how I manage myself and how I portray myself is is that of being uh, a talent developer. I an educator, a talent developer. I'm there. I recognize people. I recognize their talents. Uh, I'm able to get the best out of out of the people I work with, and it's not just musicians I do this with. I do this with other people. I've had recording studios and I've had companies and I do other things and I'm an entrepreneur and I've been a founder and all the rest of the stuff that goes with it. But even the guy who does the maintenance for my place, I've I've always been able to go back and find who you are and how I can help you be better. And I do that with the musicians around me, and I've always been surrounded with of talent that is promising, and I've always been able to recognize it and help build it. And so this is something that I do all the time. And you look in the album, and there are several musicians in the album that are young cats that need an opportunity, that are really good, and they need the opportunity, they need someone to open the doors for them. If and if those of us who are already sort of established and set, and if we don't open the doors for these guys, who's going to do it, right? And I do this, and all my projects, I always bring young people in. I try to bring new people in, and in fact, the my record label is Latinbaum Records, is actually focused on that, on finding new talent. It doesn't necessarily have to be young talent; it just has to be new talent, right? Uh, if anything defines me is from a professional standpoint and as a human being is really that. I I think that I think that I'm a decent human being. I I don't. I have some pretty basic and simple rules. You, if you can't say something good about someone, don't speak at all. I have some very basic rules, and I try to stay on the good side of life, and uh, that's really me as a person. I'm working. I'm I work all the time, whether I'm working or not. I music is beyond, like, I can't sit down and work on something or read a book and listen to music. I can't do that because my I'm focusing, thinking about, oh, that that was a weird note. That's okay. Keep on reading, and you go, oh, why did he do that? That's an interesting change. How did that happen? And
Yeah.
I can't concentrate on reading,
Yeah.
right? And I can't concentrate on doing work on my computer or writing a letter or doing anything else. My family freaks out because I turn on what I call noise, and that is, I'll go to Netflix and I'll put on one of those series that has, I don't know, 20 seasons, and I just hit play and let it roll. And it's like someone's there keeping me company, but I can ignore that,
Yeah.
and I can have noise around me, and I can work on what I'm doing, or I shut it off completely. Those are my two choices. But I can't have music doing that because it puts me to work, but
Yep.
makes my mind work.
I
Um,
get it.
uh, I'm constantly arranging in my head.
Yeah.
And so my phone, this is a great thing. And so I keep my phone, and I have all these ideas, and I put them down, and uh, and I keep them there, and I go back to them, and I go reference to them, and I try to build some of these ideas. But a lot of what I do, uh, which also is part of who I am, is to improvise all the time. And to be keenly aware of spontaneity, and what happens by accident. Like, accidents are my best friends in the studio. Sometimes accidents turn out better than what was originally intended or written on the score. And you got to be keenly aware of that. You got to be your ears got to be open for that. And so I exercise that all the time. In fact, one of the tunes in Impressions is just that. When I was a young kid, when I started work, I started working at the music store after I got the organ. About a year and a half later, I started working as a demonstrator in the music store. Uh, and I got together. I hooked up with uh, with the piano teacher and the piano tuner. And we used to go to the tuner's apartment. He lived in like a 10th or a 12th floor, right on a strip on Isla Verde. And he had this beautiful Bannerman uh, uh, 6 foot piano. And we would sit there and take turns all night long. I would play for a while, and the teacher would get up and play for a while, and then the tuner would get up and play for a while, and we would do this all night long until the sun came out the next day. And right at that time, uh, Keith Jarrett had recently come out with the Köln, Germany album, where he sat and actually improvised the whole concert. And I thought that was the most wonderful thing in the world. I thought, wow, I was never really a good study for to learn music, and I actually learned formal music later later in life.
Yeah.
But when I was a kid, I really didn't study music. It was all by
Yeah.
ear. It was all empirical, and to me, it was like, wow, this is great, man. I mean,
Yeah.
this guy puts on this whole concert, does sells an album, is like super famous, and all he did was sit down and improvise.
Yeah.
And so I started to do that.
Yeah.
And one of the tunes, the fourth cut on the album, which is Another Life, is just that, is a day that I sat down and improvised and heard it and said, this is it. This is going.
Wonderful. That's a great story. If anyone wants to pick up the album or learn more about you, where can they go?
Well, they can go to israeltanenbaum.com. And there's, when you land there, you'll see the album cover, and right below it is there's the liner notes to the album, and under that is all of the information of the main musicians in the album. There are many guests in the album. I brought a whole bunch of people together, and there are many guests, but you'll see a little story of each one of them. But right when you're there, at the top of the page, there's a little button that says "Buy Now," and you can buy the CD there.
Cool.
You can also go to sohomusic.com and go from there. It's on Amazon, and of course, it's on all the streaming platforms.
Perfect.
Available.
Excellent. Israel, this has been great. Thank you for opening up. Thanks for your time. Best of luck with everything.
Well, thank you very much. And if I can be of any good to you in any other way, just let me know.
Absolutely.
I'm
one last request.
Sure.
Can you do a plug for my show? I'd love to keep you on in front of my viewers. Just introduce yourself, what you do, where you're coming out of, and you're listening to my music on Neon Jazz with Joe Domino, something like that, and I'll play it on the show.
Okay, you want me to send you that separately?
If you want, yeah. I know that's kind of your gig, or you can do it right now.
What is this? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Neon Jazz with Joe Domino.
Okay.
And then, yeah, however you want to tailor it, you can send it. That's fine.
But is this is only audio? This is only radio that you use,
yeah.
Or you use video?
It'll be radio.
It'll be radio. Okay, so let's do that. Let me set that up. Let me send it to you. I'll send it to you this afternoon.
Sounds great, man. Israel, thank you. Great to meet you. Best of luck.
Thanks a lot, Joe.
Appreciate it.
Be well.
You too.
Take
care.
Bye-bye.
See you later.